If you've ever watched a phone screen load one more time, refreshing a location pin that refuses to move, staring at a battery percentage like it is a pulse, you already understand the first truth about missing people. The disappearance is rarely loud. It does not begin with a scream, or a chase, or a perfect last sentence. It begins with a routine that fails to complete, a hike that never ends, a drive that never returns, a line that never gets answered again. And in the modern world, the first witness is not a person. It is the system. A fitness tracker that keeps counting, a genealogy database that keeps matching, a family safety app that keeps reporting a dot in the same place, hour after hour, a store camera that keeps recording a face that no one is really looking at. We live inside networks designed to document us, our steps, our routes, our habits, our last known normal. When someone goes missing, those networks do not panic. They do not grieve. They do not slow down. They simply continue. According to the FBI's National Crime Information Center, the central database used by law enforcement agencies across the United States, missing person reports are not rare events. In 2024 alone, the NCIC recorded 533,936 missing person entries. Names entered, updated, and tracked as cases unfolded. That averages to more than 44,000 entries a month, over 1,400 every single day, feeding steadily into a system built to store facts, not fear. And when the year ends, the system does not empty. As of the 31st of December 2024, the FBI reported 93,447 active missing person records still open in NCIC. Cases unresolved, identities unreturned, stories unfinished. Active does not always mean unsolved forever. It means unresolved right now. It means somewhere in the country, someone is still waiting for a knock on the door or a phone call that begins with, "Are you sitting down?" People often imagine missing persons as a single category, a single kind of danger. But the data is colder than the myths. When law enforcement agencies used the NCIC's optional missing person circumstances classification in 2024, the overwhelming majority of entries, approximately 95%, were coded as runaways, with far smaller portions listed as non-custodial parental abductions, stranger abductions, or other required adult cases. That distinction does not make the disappearances harmless. A runaway is still missing. A family abduction is still a disappearance. And the difference between voluntary and involuntary can be nothing more than what gets typed into a field during the first frantic hour. Beyond NCIC, other systems quietly hold the unfinished. The National Missing and Unidentified Person System, known as NamUs, maintains publicly accessible records of unresolved missing and unidentified cases nationwide, and at any given time, it contains tens of thousands of open missing person cases, names and faces waiting to be matched to something that already exists somewhere else. Numbers are useful, but numbers do not explain the sensation. The sensation is this: a missing person is not a blank space. It is a presence that continues without permission. A toothbrush left by the sink, a hoodie still shaped like shoulders on the back of a chair, a car key that will never turn again. And now, in the modern day, it is also a trail of digital confirmations. A route line drawn cleanly through the woods, a time-stamped last update from beneath the surface of a river, a family tree that suddenly produces a name for a man who died before the internet could recognize him. These systems were sold to us as safety. Track your run, share your location, upload your DNA, keep your emergency contacts current. Do it because it is responsible. Do it because it means someone can find you. But there is a second truth about missing people. Finding is not the same as saving. Sometimes the system does exactly what it was built to do. It records, it preserves, it confirms. And all it gives you back is precision. A perfect map of where someone stopped moving. A clean percentage telling you who a body belonged to. A little dot that refuses to leave the water. Technology does not lie, but it also does not comfort. It can show you the exact moment a life becomes a statistic without offering any way to change it. Tonight, these are not stories about legends, monsters, or supernatural explanations. These are stories about ordinary people, living inside ordinary routines, who vanish in ways that are brutally modern. Because in a world where everything is logged, the most unsettling question is not, how could someone disappear? It is this: how can someone be missing while the system keeps reporting them with perfect calm. 5 missing persons and 5 records that never closed. 5 timelines that continued updating after the person they described was already gone. So charge your phone, check your settings, confirm your emergency contact, and when the screen refreshes one more time, pay attention to what it tells you. Because the most terrifying part of a disappearance is not the mystery, it is the accuracy. Story 1. The tracker never stopped. The last photo my daughter sent me was of fog. Not the soft kind that rolls off the river in the morning. This was thick and pale, like breath on glass, caught between the trees. She'd framed it so the trail disappeared into whiteness. In the bottom corner, the tip of her boot was visible, muddied at the seam, as if she'd stepped into something that didn't want to let go. Caption: perfect weather. Feels like the world's holding its breath. I replied with a heart and told her to be careful. I asked if she'd brought enough water. I asked if she'd told anyone which trail she was doing. The usual mother questions you ask when your child is an adult and you're trying to pretend you have a say in anything anymore. She loved my message and didn't answer. That was my first mistake, thinking the little heart meant she'd seen it and that was enough. In the Smokies, silence is never just silence. It's the trees swallowing sound. It's the way the mountains keep what you bring into them. Maya had been hiking since she was a teenager. She called it her therapy. Her office job left her wired, jaw tight, eyes always looking past you like she was scanning for the next email. Hiking was the only thing that seemed to turn her into herself again. When she moved back home after her lease ended, she started doing the national park on weekends. She'd drive down early, get coffee, send me a selfie with her hood up and her earbuds in, and then vanish into the green. I didn't love it. Not in the way you love something safe. I loved that she loved it. I loved how calm she was afterward. I hated the park's size, the way its trails looked orderly on maps but felt endless in reality, like veins branching into a body too large to understand. I'd read the missing person stories, the ones that always started with experienced hiker and ended with search suspended. So I bought her the tracker. It was meant to be a compromise. A bracelet, sleek and black, something modern and reassuring. It counted steps, tracked heart rate, mapped routes, recorded elevation. It let you share your activity with friends. It synced to her phone automatically. She laughed when I gave it to her. "You're trying to turn me into data," she said, rolling her eyes. "Just wear it," I told her. "Humor me." She wore it. That's the cruel part. She did what I asked. On the day she disappeared, the weather was mild for October. Cool enough for a jacket, warm enough to sweat on the climbs. She told me she was doing an out and back. Nothing technical, nothing off trail. She said she'd be home before dark. I watched her leave from the kitchen window, hands around my coffee mug, the steam curling up like a warning. She waved without turning, the way young people do when they're already halfway into their next thought. That evening, I made chili. I set out a bowl. I checked the driveway once, then twice. At 7, I texted her, "Hey, you close?" At 8, "Maya." At 9, I called, straight to voicemail. By 10, my body was doing what it does when it knows something my mind refuses to say. My hands were shaking. The house felt too large, every room holding its breath. I kept walking from window to window like I could see her headlights on the road if I looked hard enough. I opened the tracking app. Her activity was logged. A hike. Start time, 9:14 a.m. A loop that began at a popular trailhead just inside the park boundary. Good cell service in spots. Plenty of foot traffic early in the day, thinning out toward the afternoon. I zoomed in. A thin line traced the trail like a thread sewn through the trees. She'd gone a mile. 2, 3. The map showed her moving steady, the pace consistent. The app recorded her heart rate, the way it rises on inclines and dips on flats. It felt obscene to see it. This private rhythm turned into a graph. At 12:38 p.m., her pace slowed. At 12:41, it slowed again. At 12:43, the line stopped. Not paused, stopped. A hard end, like someone had cut the thread. I stared at that little dot on the screen until my eyes watered. It sat just off a curve in the trail, where the contour lines crowded together, indicating a slope. The map didn't show what it looked like there. The map never shows the way the woods can change in 100 feet, the way sunlight can vanish and everything can smell suddenly of damp rot. I refreshed the app. as if the dot might start moving again if I asked politely enough. It didn't. I called the ranger station first, then 911, when I couldn't make myself believe a voicemail would save her. I told the dispatcher my daughter hadn't come home. I told her the trail. I told her the last location. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. "Ma'am, are you sure she's missing? Sometimes hikers lose track of time." I wanted to scream. Of course she could lose track of time. Of course she could stop somewhere to take pictures. Of course she could decide to get dinner with a friend afterward and forget to text. But my body knew. There is a specific kind of dread that comes when you realize you've stepped into a story you've read before. You know the beats. You know how it ends. You know you're about to become a statistic. By midnight, law enforcement and park rangers were on the trail. They asked me what she wore. They asked if she had any medical conditions. They asked if she had any history of depression. They asked if she'd been in a relationship that had ended badly. They asked everything except the question that lived behind their eyes. Is there anyone who would want to hurt her? I gave them the tracker data. I showed them the stopped dot. I showed them the time. The next morning, they went in with dogs. I stayed home because they told me to, because they said the trail was crowded with searchers and I would get in the way, because they said I should be available in case Maya called. I spent the day sitting on the couch with the phone in my hand, watching the tracker app like it was a heart monitor in an ICU. I kept imagining her alive somewhere, injured but breathing, waiting for someone to find her. I imagined her holding onto her phone, trying to keep the battery alive, watching the same dot I was watching. At 3:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was a ranger. He asked if I was sitting down. His tone flattened my hope into something heavy and cold. They found her just after noon, not far from where the tracker dot had stopped. She was off the trail by less than 20 yards, down a small embankment tangled with rhododendron. If you weren't looking for her, you could walk past and never know. They said there was no sign of a struggle on the main trail, no disturbed ground, no broken branches. The dogs had picked up her scent, then veered. They said her hands were clean. They said her clothes were in place. They said she had been strangled. When you hear a sentence like that, the world becomes a hallway, long and narrow. You can't turn your head. You can't look away. You just keep walking down it because there's nowhere else to go. I went to the station. I signed papers. I answered questions I barely understood. They asked about the tracker again. They asked about her phone. I told them the app showed her route, the last dot, the time. A detective, a man with tired eyes and a neat beard, asked, "Do you know where her phone is?" "No," I said. "It was with her. It has to be with her." They found the phone later that night, about a quarter-mile away from her body, tucked under a fallen log like someone had tried to hide it quickly without caring if it was found. The battery was dead. There were no obvious prints. The case was already slipping into the familiar shape of unsolved, except for the tracker. The detective came to my house 2 days later. He sat at my kitchen table with a laptop open, the kind of laptop that looked like it had been slammed shut 100 times. "We pulled the fitness data from her phone," he said. "It synced before the phone died." I nodded, my hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. I kept expecting him to say something that would make it less real. People say I'm sorry and think it's a bridge, but it's just a sign that says the road ahead is still broken. He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a map of the trail, her route traced in bright color, her pace and heart rate plotted along a timeline. It was the same information I'd seen, but in the hands of the police it looked clinical, like an autopsy report. He pointed to the stop dot. "This is where she stopped moving. At 12:43. I swallowed. "Yes." He clicked again. A new line appeared on the map, separate from the original route. It began at the stop dot and shot away along a thin, barely marked path that cut through the forest. At first, my mind didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like a mistake, like the app had glitched and drawn a line straight through the trees. Then I noticed the numbers. Speed, 12 miles per hour, 18 miles per hour, 26 miles per hour. Then, at 12:47 p.m., a spike, 45 miles per hour. My breath came out in a sound I didn't recognize. "That," I whispered. "That can't be her." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." He leaned forward, tapping the screen as if emphasizing reality. Her phone moved after her heart rate went flat. It moved fast. Faster than anyone runs on that terrain. Faster than any normal hiker carries something. He paused. letting the implications settle like ash. ATVs, he said. Four-wheelers. There are service routes and illegal cut-throughs. People use them. Most of them are local. Most of them know where cameras are and where they aren't. I stared at the line on the screen. The thought of someone taking my daughter's phone like it was trash, like it was a loose end, made my skin crawl. Not just taking it, but riding away with it. The wind loud in their ears, the woods blurring, as if her life was nothing more than an inconvenience to remove. Was the phone moving because he had it? I said, my voice breaking. Or because the detective's eyes held mine. He didn't flinch. We don't believe she was alive when the phone moved. It was strange, hearing that and feeling relief. A small, sick relief that at least she hadn't been dragged. Then guilt, immediate and sharp, for being relieved about anything at all. What about DNA? I asked. Fingerprints? Something? He shook his head. Nothing usable. Whoever did it was careful. Or lucky. Or both. He closed the laptop. The click of it shutting sounded like a door locking. Witnesses, he said. We've got 2 separate people who reported seeing a maroon four-wheeler in that area that afternoon. They didn't think anything of it at the time. People break the rules all the time. But now that we know the phone moved like this, it matters. The next weeks passed in a fog I can't describe. Grief is not just sadness, it's a new climate. The air is heavier. Colors look wrong. Time doesn't behave properly. You can't trust your own memory because it keeps replaying the same moments, trying to find the exact second everything went bad. I went through Maya's room. Her laundry basket still held clothes she'd worn that week. Her charger sat on the nightstand like a small shrine. I found her earbuds in the pocket of her jacket and cried so hard I couldn't breathe, because the thought of her walking that trail, listening to music, feeling safe, felt unbearable. The detective called me to update me, but he never said much. They were working leads. They were interviewing locals. They were trying to match the tracker route to known ATV paths. One night, he called, and his voice sounded different, tight. We found him, he said. It took me a moment to understand what him meant. My mind didn't want to accept there could be a person attached to what happened, a human being with a name and a face and a house. How? I managed. Witnesses, he said. Maroon four-wheeler. One of them remembered a detail, a sticker, something on the side panel. Another person saw the same machine at a gas station off the park road. We pulled security footage. Got a partial plate from a truck hauling it. He paused. We served a warrant. We found the ATV. We found her phone. My hands went numb around the receiver. In his house? I whispered. In his shed, the detective said. He'd stripped it for parts. He thought that would erase it. Erase it. Like her life was something you could disassemble with a screwdriver. They arrested him. He confessed. The details were sealed for the trial, and I didn't ask. Part of me wanted every ugly truth, and part of me wanted to live the rest of my life without seeing her last moments in my mind. The news called it a victory. The papers wrote about swift detective work and technology aiding investigation. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages telling me how lucky I was that they caught him. Lucky, as if I'd won something. They put him in court. They put him in a suit. They let him sit in a chair like a person. I sat behind the prosecutor with Maya's photo in my hands. In the picture, she's laughing, hair blown across her face, eyes squinting in sunlight. She looks alive. She looks like she could walk into the room at any moment and tell me I was overreacting. When they read the tracker data into evidence, my stomach turned. The prosecutor explained it like a lesson. The data shows the victim's movement, she said. At 12:43 p.m., her movement stops. Her heart rate ceases. The phone then travels along a route inconsistent with hiking. At 12:47 p.m., the phone reaches a speed of approximately 45 miles per hour. The jurors lean forward. People love numbers when they're too afraid to look at what the numbers represent. The prosecutor said, this indicates the phone was transported by a motorized vehicle consistent with an ATV. The tracker never lied. It never softened. It never made space for my daughter as a person. It just recorded the truth in neat lines and spikes. After the trial, after the sentence, after the last news van pulled away, I went back to the app. It still had the hike saved. Most people delete those. They don't want the reminder. They don't want the route sitting in their pocket like a bruise. I couldn't. I'd open it at night when the house was too quiet and I felt like I was disappearing with her. I'd zoom in on the trail, tracing the line with my finger on the screen as if I could touch her through it. The stop dot sat there, still. The second line, the one that shot away, still looked wrong every time I saw it, like a violent scribble across something delicate. Sometimes I'd imagine the moment her phone started moving. I'd picture it in someone else's hand, bouncing as the ATV hit ruts, the GPS struggling to keep up under a canopy of trees. The phone didn't know she was gone. The phone kept counting steps, kept looking for motion, kept trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become senseless. And then, one night, months later, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The app lets you replay the hike as an animation. A dot moving along the trail, time rolling forward. It's meant to show your progress, a little victory lap for your body. I pressed play, the dot moved. Steady pace, steady heart rate, the line unspooling behind her. I watched it like it was a home video. At 12:38, the dot slowed. At 12:41, slower. At 12:43, it stopped. I waited for the second line, the fast movement, the part I hated. But in the seconds between the stop and the speed spike, the dot did something strange. It moved, just slightly, off the trail, into the brush. Not fast, not like the ATV later. Just a small drift, a wobble, as if she'd stepped 1 foot off the path. Then it stopped again. Then the line shot away, the phone racing through the woods. I stared so hard my eyes ached. I replayed it, again and again. The tiny drift was consistent every time. 3, maybe 4 steps off the trail. A moment where she was still moving, but not forward. A moment where she was leaving the path. I called the detective the next morning. He answered with the weary patience of someone who thought he'd done all he could. "It's nothing," he said at first, when I described it. "GPS drift, tree cover, the signal bounces." But my voice didn't let go. "It happens every time," I insisted. "The same direction, the same distance. It's part of the data." Silence on the line. Then he said, "Send me a screenshot." I did. He called back later that afternoon. His voice was quieter than before. "We didn't notice that," he admitted. My throat tightened. "What does it mean?" He exhaled slowly, the sound of someone looking at a door they didn't want to open. "It could be drift, it could be nothing, but if it isn't," he didn't finish. Because if it wasn't nothing, it meant she'd stepped off the trail willingly or unwillingly. It meant she'd been lured. It meant she'd been approached. It meant the last thing she did was move towards something in the woods. I sat at my kitchen table after the call ended, staring at the tracker bracelet Maya had left on her dresser when she came home that last night before the hike. She'd forgotten it. She'd taken it off and set it down like it was a watch you didn't need for sleep. It was still there, black band curled in a small circle. The tracker that was supposed to keep her safe had been on her phone instead, a piece of software, a silent witness. It struck me then, with a clarity that felt like falling, that the tracker had recorded her dying, and then recorded her phone being carried away, and the entire time it was doing what it was designed to do. It wasn't trying to save her, it was trying to remember her correctly. That night, I opened the app again and replayed the hike. I watched the dot reach the curve in the trail. I watched it slow. I watched it drift, those few steps off the path, into the brush where the world holds its breath. I watched it stop, and then, like always, the phone began to move at impossible speed. The line shooting away through the trees, through the fog, through the green that never gives anything back. I sat there until the replay ended and the dot froze, and I realized the worst part was not that the tracker kept watching after she was gone. The worst part was that it would keep watching forever. Long after I was gone, too. Her last recorded steps would still be there, waiting for someone to press play and watch my daughter disappear all over again. Story 2. 93%. Cold cases do not sit quietly. People talk about them like dusty folders, like a stack of paper that waits politely in a cabinet until someone has time to care. That is not what they are. They are weight. They live in the corners of your vision and in the back of your throat. They show up when you're driving home at night and the road is empty and your headlights carve tunnels through the dark. They are names you don't have. They are mothers who stop calling after the 5th year and then start again on the 10th, because grief changes shape but it does not dissolve. They are the ones that teach you a specific kind of humility. The world is larger than your ability to hold it accountable. I'd been with Plymouth County long enough to know the smell of old paper and cheap coffee as a kind of perfume. I wasn't a romantic about it, but I believed in work, in showing up, in putting one foot in front of the other even when the trail went cold. When my captain decided we were going to spend a quarter tightening up unresolved cases, he didn't do it because he had a soft heart. He did it because the state was pushing funding toward clearance rates, and because new tools made old failures look like laziness. Look at the old ones, he told me. See what we can close. Give families answers. Clear the shelves, like people were inventory. That's how I ended up in the basement archive on a Tuesday in late November, scrolling through a digital catalog while a radiator clicked and hissed like an irritated animal. The fluorescent lights above me were harsh, flattening everything into the same tired shade of institutional beige. Rows of file boxes lined the walls, each one marked with a year and a case number, each one holding someone's missing ending. I didn't go in with a plan. Cold cases don't like plans. They like accidents. I was searching for anything with preserved evidence, anything we could test with modern labs. I was looking for DNA kits, old sexual assault evidence, fingerprints that had never been run through updated databases. I wasn't looking for a John Doe. I found him anyway. Case file, 2008 to 1137. Unidentified male, estimated age mid-30s. Discovered deceased near the water tower outside Lamar's. Cause of death, overdose, no ID, no wallet, no vehicle. No reported missing person match. No fingerprints on file that hid. The notes were thin, written in the blunt language of exhausted deputies who had a stack of calls waiting and no reason to believe the dead man would matter to anyone. A body in a rural spot was treated like an unfortunate inconvenience, a problem to document and move along. There was one photograph clipped to the front of the folder. It was black and white, grainy, taken under harsh light. The man's face was slack, lips parted slightly. His eyes were closed, lashes damp against his cheeks. There was something peaceful about him that felt wrong, like he'd been given a quiet exit he didn't deserve. Or maybe it was just the way the drugs had left him. A tag number was scribbled on the photo's edge. John Doe. The folder didn't say what bothered me about it, but something did. It wasn't the overdose. Not in Iowa. Not in 2008 when pills were moving through small towns like a slow poison. It wasn't the location, though the water tower sat in a weird patch of land. Not quite city, not quite country. A place people drove past without looking. It was the emptiness. No missing person report. No one calling. No one putting his photo on a bulletin board. No one showing up to claim him. People don't fall out of the sky. People come from somewhere. I flipped through the file. There was a note about his clothing. Worn jeans, cheap sneakers, a flannel shirt that had been washed too many times. No distinctive tattoos, no jewelry, no cell phone. Then I saw it. Evidence preserved. Dental impressions, swab kit, blood card. Blood card. In 2008, it was routine to preserve what you could. Back then, there wasn't much to do with it if the databases didn't return a match. But now is different. I carried the file upstairs and set it on my desk like a dare. My partner Mara glanced over. "What's that?" "Old John Doe," I said. She made a face. "Overdose?" "Yeah, those are rough. No one ever reports them missing." "That's the part I don't like," I said. Mara shrugged and went back to her paperwork. She'd seen enough bodies to know you can't save everyone, and she developed the protective cynicism that keeps you functional. I didn't have that particular shield, not yet. That night, I sat in my office long after the building emptied. The lights in the hallway shut off automatically at 9, leaving only the glow from my desk lamp and the computer monitor. The station was quiet in that hollow way that makes every sound feel amplified. The hum of the HVAC, the distant thunk of a door settling, the occasional crackle of the radio. I opened the file again and stared at the dead man's face. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I imagined him alive. It's easy to dehumanize a John Doe because the file does it for you. Unidentified male, deceased, overdose. Those words are boxes you can stack. But a man is not a box. A man has a laugh, a favorite song, a person who once called him by a nickname. A man is someone who, at some point, was loved. I called the lab in the morning and asked what we still had. "Blood card's intact," the technician said. "Swab kit's good. We could run it through CODIS again, but if it didn't hit before." "I'm not thinking CODIS," I said. There was a pause. "What are you thinking?" I looked out my office window at the gray Iowa sky. It hung low, heavy with the threat of snow. Genealogy databases, I said. Mara overheard me and raised an eyebrow. You serious? I'm serious, I said. She leaned in my doorway. That's a rabbit hole. Yeah, I said, but it's a rabbit hole with names at the bottom. Running DNA through consumer genealogy sites is not a clean process. People think it's like a TV show, like you type a code into a computer and a flashing banner announces the killer. In reality, it's paperwork, court approvals, chain of custody, ethical debates that never end. But our department had started using it in certain cases, particularly unidentified remains. We'd had enough success to justify the mess. I filed a request. I waited. I followed procedure. And while I waited, I read the file again and again until I could recite it. I learned the exact coordinates where he'd been found. I studied the map of the water tower area. I drove out there one afternoon, just to see it with my own eyes. The tower rose above the fields like a giant white bone. The ground around it was a mix of gravel and patchy grass, wind-blown and littered with brittle weeds. There was no magic there, no obvious reason for anyone to choose that spot to die, which meant he hadn't chosen it. Or he had, and no one noticed. I stood under the tower and listened to the wind. It made a thin, whistling sound as it moved through the metal supports. A lonely noise, like something trying to speak. I wondered if he'd heard that sound in his last moments, if it had been the last thing in the world besides his own heartbeat. When the DNA results came back, it wasn't with fireworks. It was an email. Subject line, possible familial match. I opened it and felt my stomach tighten as I read the percentage. 93% probability of relation to Simmons Harold. I read it again. 93. Not a vague maybe, not a distant cousin, a close genetic link. Brother, parent, child. My mouth went dry. Mara looked up from her desk. Well? I turned my screen toward her. She whistled softly. That'll do it. It took another day to track down Harold Simmons. The name wasn't uncommon, but the database had listed an age and a region. We found an address just outside Sioux City. I drove out alone. I told myself it was because it would go faster that way. But the truth was, I wanted the moment to be quiet, controlled. 2 detectives showing up on a porch can feel like an invasion. 1 detective can feel like a conversation, if you're careful. The Simmons house was modest. White siding, a small porch with a faded swing, a pickup truck parked out front with rust around the wheel wells. There were no holiday decorations, despite it being December. The yard looked like it had given up on being maintained. I knocked. A man opened the door a few inches. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. His hair was gray, thin at the crown. His eyes were wary, but not surprised, as if he'd been expecting someone to show up eventually, even if he didn't know why. Mr. Simmons, I asked. He nodded. My name is Detective Carter. Can I speak with you for a minute? He looked past me, down the street, as if checking whether I'd brought more trouble. Then he opened the door wider. Inside, the house smelled like old coffee and a faint trace of cigarette smoke. The living room was cluttered with newspapers stacked in uneven piles, like someone had started organizing and then stopped. A television sat in the corner, muted, showing a midday talk show with captions running across the screen. Mr. Simmons didn't offer me a seat. He just stood in the doorway between the living room and the hall, arms folded loosely. What's this about? He asked. I took out my notebook, not because I needed it, but because people feel safer when you look official. This is a bit unusual, I said. We're working an old case. An unidentified man found deceased back in 2008 near Lamar's. His face changed slightly, not a flinch. Something subtler, a tightening around the eyes, like a muscle memory of pain. Okay, he said. We recently ran DNA from the remains through a genealogy database, I continued. We received a match indicating a close familial relationship. His eyes stayed on mine, but they went distant, like he was watching something behind me. Do you have a brother? I asked. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The house was silent, except for the faint hiss of the heater and the muted TV captions flickering. Then he said, I did. The words fell heavy. What was his name? I asked, though I already knew. Mr. Simmons swallowed. His throat bobbed. Elliot, he said. Elliot Simmons. I wrote it down. When was the last time you saw him? His gaze dropped to the floor. A long time ago. How long? 17 years, he said, and his voice cracked on the number. It hit me like a cold wind. The case file said the body was found 17 years ago. The DNA match said brother. The timeline clicked into place with a brutal cleanliness. Did Elliot go missing? I asked gently. Mr. Simmons let out a short laugh that wasn't laughter at all. He didn't go missing, he said. He left. That's how families phrase it when disappearance is wrapped in shame. He left, he drifted. He fell in with the wrong crowd. He made choices. It's easier than saying, we lost him. He struggled with drugs? I asked. Mr. Simmons nodded once, sharp. After Mom died, he said. He started. Pills at first. Then whatever he could get. He rubbed a hand over his face, hard, as if wiping away something sticky. He'd come around sometimes. He'd show up hungry. He'd swear he was clean. He'd ask for money. I stopped giving it to him. He looked up at me then, and there was anger in his eyes. But it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at time. We tried, he said. I'm not saying we didn't. But after a while, you don't know what's helping and what's killing them faster. I nodded. I'd heard this before, in different houses, different towns. Addiction turns love into a calculation, and no one wins. Did you ever report him missing? I asked. Mr. Simmons shook his head slowly. He didn't stay gone long enough, he said. Not at first. Then it was years. And I thought. His voice trailed off. You thought what? I asked. He looked toward the hallway, toward a closed door at the end. I thought he was dead, he whispered. The honesty of it made my stomach twist. Families of missing people live in limbo. Families of addicts live in a different kind of limbo, one where hope feels dangerous. I took a breath. Mr. Simmons, I said, we believe the unidentified man found in 2008 is your brother. His face didn't collapse the way I expected. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just stood very still, like someone had turned the sound off inside him. Where was he asked finally. Near the water tower outside Lamar's, I said. He nodded, as if that location meant something, or as if he was filing it away into the story he'd been telling himself for 17 years. How, he asked, though he already knew. Overdose, I said. That was the cause of death. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked away. There's a thing that happens when you give someone an answer they've been living without. Relief and grief hit at the same time. It's not a clean emotion. It's a collision. I told him we'd need a formal DNA sample to confirm, though the genealogy match was strong. I told him about dental records. I told him about the process of identification. He nodded through all of it like he was watching someone else's life. Then he said something that made the hair on my arms rise. He always hated water towers, he said quietly. I blinked. What? Mr. Simmons stared at the floor. When we were kids, he said, we used to walk by the one near our house. He said it looked like a man standing in a field with his head cut off. He swallowed. He said it felt like it was watching you. I forced a small smile. Not because it was funny, but because people smile when they're trying to survive. Kids say stuff, I said. Mr. Simmons shook his head. Elliot didn't say things. He said. He noticed them. I left the house with his DNA sample in an evidence kit, my hands cold despite my gloves. The sky had started snowing lightly, flakes drifting down like ash. On the drive back, I kept thinking about the water tower, about a man dying under something he'd been afraid of as a child, about the way fear can circle back around and meet you at the end. Back at the station, the confirmation process moved quickly. Dental records matched. DNA confirmed it beyond doubt. John Doe became Elliot Simmons. We updated the file. We printed the new name on a clean sheet and slid it into the folder like a bandage. Then came the part people don't talk about. Contacting next of kin, updating the state records, arranging for the remains to be released. It's administrative, but it's also sacred in a way. You are returning a person to their name, and you have to do it right. Mr. Simmons came to the station to sign paperwork. He brought his wife, a quiet woman with tired eyes, and his adult daughter, who looked like she'd cried in the car and then wiped her face clean. They sat in the interview room, under the harsh light, the same room where I'd watched suspects squirm, the same room where people lied and confessed and begged. In that room, the Simmons family looked small. I slid the photo across the table. Not the crime scene photo, the one we'd managed to find from old records, a DMV image from years before Elliot disappeared. His hair was longer then, his smile crooked. He looked like someone who could have been your coworker, your neighbor, the guy who held the door open for you at the gas station. Mr. Simmons stared at it like it might bite him. That's him, he said. His daughter, the niece who'd never known him, leaned forward. Her eyes widened. "I've seen him," she whispered. We all looked at her. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I mean, I've seen his face," she said. "In the hallway, in pictures, in dreams." Mr. Simmons's wife reached over and squeezed her hand. "Honey," she murmured, but the young woman kept staring at the photo. "He looks like he's about to say something," she whispered. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Not because of anything supernatural, because grief does that. It makes you see life in still images. It makes you imagine voices where there are none. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I know this is." "It's fine," Mr. Simmons cut in, though his voice wasn't fine. He rubbed his hands together hard, as if trying to warm them. "So that's it," he said. He's been sitting in a file this whole time." I hesitated. "We didn't have the tools," I said, "back then." "Yeah," he said, but his eyes were sharp now. "You didn't have the tools. So he stayed. Nobody." The accusation wasn't cruel. It was true. I nodded. "I'm sorry," I repeated. He stared at the table for a long moment, then said, "He could have been found sooner." "Maybe," I admitted. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. "But he wasn't," he said. No one spoke after that for a moment. Outside the interview room, the station kept moving. Phones rang. Officers laughed at something in the hallway. A printer spat out paper. Life didn't stop just because someone's loss finally got a name. After they left, Mara came into my office. "You did a good thing," she said. I nodded, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like closing a door on a room that had been full of air, and now the air was gone. That night, I drove back out to the water tower. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me needed to see the end point again now that it had a name. Maybe because the case had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. The tower loomed against the dark sky, lit by a single weak lamp that cast a sickly yellow halo. The snow had stopped, leaving the fields covered in a thin white layer that reflected the moonlight. Everything looked clean, and that made it worse. I parked on the side of the gravel road and walked toward the tower. My boots crunched in the snow. The air smelled sharp, metallic. I stood where the file said he'd been found. There was nothing there now. No marker, no sign, no evidence that a man had died alone in that spot. I pulled out my phone and opened the genealogy email again. 93%, a number that had traveled across 17 years and rewired the story. Identity doesn't disappear. It waits to be recognized. I looked up at the tower's round belly, at the thin supports holding it above the ground like ribs. I tried to imagine Elliot as a kid, squinting up at something like this and calling it a headless man in a field. I tried to imagine him grown, standing under it, cold and alone, maybe high, maybe not, maybe just tired. I tried to imagine him thinking, in his last clear moment, that someone would find him. The wind moved through the tower supports, making that same thin whistling sound I'd heard the first time. It sounded like a voice trapped in metal. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. I looked down. It was a notification from the genealogy site, one of those auto-generated updates you can't stop without digging through settings. "New match found," it said. My stomach dropped. I hadn't uploaded anything new. I hadn't run another case. The system wasn't supposed to be doing anything. I tapped the notification. A new profile populated on the screen, loading slowly as the weak rural signal struggled. Percentage, 93%. Close family. Name, Carter. My name. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The tower above me creaked softly in the wind, and in that vast field of snow and silence, the world felt suddenly too connected, as if every file and every cabinet had grown invisible threads that could wrap around you the moment you looked too closely. I stared at the screen until it blurred. The notification wasn't possible. It didn't make sense. It had to be an error, a glitch, a cached update from something else. But the number held steady. 93%. I backed away from the spot under the tower, my boots sliding slightly on the icy ground. My heart hammered in my ears. I told myself it was just adrenaline, just the cold. I looked out across the field toward the road, toward my car, toward the distant lights of town, and for the first time since I'd opened Elliot Simmons's file, I understood what it meant to be identified by a system that doesn't care who you are, only how you connect. I shut my phone off. The screen went black, reflecting my face faintly. For a moment, in that dark glass, I looked like a man in a field with his head cut off. Story 3. Last location, river. Halloween weekend always smells like cheap fog, machine fluid, and wet leaves. It doesn't matter what college town you're in. The atmosphere is the same. Cold air that bites your knuckles, damp sidewalks, slick with crushed candy and spilled beer, and this manic energy buzzing through the streets like the whole place is pretending the season isn't dying. That night, our dorm floor felt like it was vibrating. Doors kept opening and closing. Music bled through the walls in overlapping layers. People were laughing too loudly, talking too fast, already half drunk by the time they finished getting dressed. I'd been invited to the party too, technically. It was one of those open house things off campus that everyone called a party, even though it was really just a packed living room and a backyard with a fire pit and a speaker the size of a suitcase. But I didn't go. I had a chem lab exam on Monday and a stomach that turns itself inside out when I drink. I was the roommate who did the boring stuff. Make ramen, label my Tupperware, remind people to lock the door. They tease me for it in that affectionate way people tease you when they assume you'll always be there, stable and available. Mom of the dorm, Kayla called me, tugging on my sleeve as she leaned in the mirror to fix her eyeliner. She had on these glittery black wings drawn at the corners of her eyes and a costume that was technically a witch but was mostly just a short dress and boots. "You're literally 2 months older than me," I said. "Mentally, you're 70, she shot back, grinning. Jordan was behind her, digging through his drawer for something. He was going as a vampire, but in a lazy way. Black jeans, a thrifted cape, fake fangs still in the packaging. He had the kind of smile that made you believe he'd never had a truly bad day. "You sure you're not coming?" he asked, cape slung over one shoulder. "I'm sure," I said. "You guys go. Just text me when you're leaving, or when you get there, or if you end up somewhere else, just keep me posted." Kayla rolled her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. "Yes, Mother," Jordan saluted. "Yes, Mother." I threw a pillow at them. They left around 10. Kayla grabbed her little crossbody bag. Jordan shoved his phone in his pocket, and they stepped into the hallway with the bright, reckless confidence of people who have never had to worry about anything ending. Before they disappeared into the elevator, Kayla turned back and called, "Don't fall asleep on us, okay?" I waved her off. "Go be feral." She laughed, and the elevator doors slid shut, swallowing her voice. I went back to my desk. The glow from my laptop felt sterile compared to the warm chaos out in the hall. I tried to focus on chemical equations, but my attention kept drifting. Every loud laugh outside made me look up. Every slam of a door made me tense. Somewhere around midnight, the dorm quieted. The party crowd had fully dispersed. Everyone was out, or passed out, or still getting ready in someone else's room. My floor felt empty, like the building itself had exhaled. I texted Kayla, "You alive?" No response. I texted Jordan, "How's it going?" No response. I told myself they were busy. Music was loud. Phones die. People forget. I tried to sleep. The thing about dorm rooms is there's no real darkness. The hallway light leaks under the door. The parking lot light seeps through the blinds. Even with your eyes closed, you can sense the building around you. Pipes clanking, distant footsteps, someone laughing on another floor. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up because someone was banging on a door down the hall. A burst of drunk laughter followed, then the sound of someone vomiting into a trash can. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. No keys in our lock. No Kayla's boots clomping across the floor. No Jordan fumbling with his cape and knocking into the chair. I checked my phone. No messages. I waited. At 3:40, I checked again. Still nothing. At 4:15, I gave up on sleep. I sat up and stared at their empty beds like they were accusing me of something. I opened Life 360. We were all on it because our parents had insisted when we moved into the dorm. For safety, they'd said. Just in case. We'd complained and made jokes about surveillance and control, but we downloaded it anyway. It became background noise. A little map of dots you rarely looked at unless you were stalking how close your friend was to the dining hall. Kayla and Jordan's icons were there, green circles with their photos. Mine was in the dorm, theirs were not. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Their dots weren't moving. That wasn't weird by itself. If they were asleep at a friend's place, it would look like that. but the location label under their names made my stomach twist. Cedar River Trail. And below that, smaller text. Near Cedar River. I zoomed in. The map shifted, the blue ribbon of the river cutting through the campus like a scar. The dots were not near the party house, not near any dorm, not near any apartment complex. They were on the river, right on it. I zoomed further, fingers shaking. Their dots were not on a street, not on a building. They were in the water. I told myself it was a glitch. GPS can be off. The app sometimes drifts. A dot can hover over a river even if you're on the bank. But it wasn't drifting. It was anchored. 2 dots, side by side, perfectly still, sitting in the dark curve of the river like someone had placed them there deliberately. I stared until my eyes burned. I tapped Kayla's icon. It showed last updated 12 minutes ago. That meant her phone still had power. That meant the app was still receiving location. That meant my hand flew to my mouth. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. I tried to breathe slowly. I tried to think like a normal person. Maybe they went for a late night walk. Maybe they were sitting on the bank. Maybe they dropped their phones. Maybe they'd thrown them in as a joke. But the part of me that had been tense all night, the part that had kept lifting its head at every sound, rose fully awake. I called Kayla, straight to voicemail. I called Jordan, straight to voicemail. I got up and paced. My feet made soft thuds on the carpet. I kept looking at their empty beds, as if they'd appear if I stared hard enough. I didn't want to call their parents. Not yet. Because once you call a parent, the world shifts. It becomes real. It becomes official. It becomes irreversible. But the river on the map looked too still, too final. At 5:02 a.m., I called Kayla's mom. She answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "Hello?" "Mrs. Brennan," I said, and my voice sounded wrong, too high. "It's Lexi, Kayla's roommate." There was a pause, the sleep clearing from her tone like fog lifting. "Is she okay?" I don't know," I admitted. "She went to a party last night with Jordan, and they haven't come back. I checked Life 360, and it shows them. It shows them at the river." Silence. Then, sharp. "At the river? What do you mean at the river?" "In the river," I whispered before I could stop myself. Her breath hitched. "Call the police," she said, and the words came out like a command issued to reality itself, as if ordering it could prevent what was coming. "I will," I said. "I am. I'm calling right now." My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped the phone dialing 911. The dispatcher asked my location, asked what was happening, asked if I had any reason to believe they were in danger. I told her about the party, the missing return, the app. "The app shows their last location in the river," I said, and hearing myself say it made bile rise in my throat. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. Time became a strange, thick thing after that. The dorm lobby was quiet when I went down, except for the fluorescent hum and the smell of floor cleaner. The security desk guy looked up, confused, as I told him what was happening. He called his supervisor. I stood there hugging myself, watching the front doors like they might open and Kayla and Jordan might stumble in laughing, damp with river mist. Annoyed that I'd overreacted. They didn't. Police arrived. Then, campus security. Then an ambulance parked near the curb like a silent prediction. One officer asked me to show him the app. I held my phone out with hands that felt disconnected from my body. He studied the screen. His face didn't change much, but his posture did. Subtle and immediate, like he'd shifted into a different kind of work. "Can you send me the location pin?" he asked. I did. Then they were gone, moving with speed that made my stomach drop because speed means urgency, and urgency means they already believe it. I sat in the lobby with Kayla's mom on speakerphone, her voice frantic as she tried calling her daughter over and over. I listened to ring after ring, each one a small blow. At 6:11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Life 360. Kayla's phone battery, 18%. Even that detail felt cruel. The app was still doing its job. It was still tracking. Still reporting. Still calm. At 6:34, another buzz. Jordan's phone battery, 12%. I stared at the screen, numb. My first thought was, their phones are alive longer than they are. I hated myself for thinking it. At 7:08 a.m., Kayla's dot shifted. Just a fraction, a tiny tremble, like a heartbeat. Mrs. Brennan gasped over the speaker. "Did it move? Lexi, did it move?" "It moved," I whispered. My mind raced. Maybe Kayla was alive. Maybe she'd surfaced. Maybe she'd climbed out. Maybe then the dot moved again, not toward shore, not along the bank, downstream, smoothly, steadily, like it was floating. I watched it slide along the river's curve as if the water itself was carrying it. Jordan's dot followed minutes later, also drifting downstream, as if the phones had been released into the current at the same time. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen because it was proof that something was in the river, something the river could take. Police found the car at 8:23. They didn't call me right away. I heard it through the security desk guy, who got a radio update and went pale. He looked at me with that careful expression adults use when they're about to break your life open. "They found a vehicle," he said quietly. "In the river." Mrs. Brennan's voice came through the speaker, sharp and desperate. What did he say? I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the map, at the two dots drifting farther away, the app still plotting their slow movement like it was a nature documentary. We went down to the river. I wasn't supposed to, technically. The officers tried to keep us back, but campus security didn't know how to handle parents who have decided rules are irrelevant. Mrs. Brennan arrived in person, hair unbrushed, face blotchy, eyes wide with a kind of raw terror I'd never seen before. Jordan's dad arrived 10 minutes later, still in his work uniform, as if he'd left his job mid-shift and driven like a madman. The river was low, but not low enough. The banks were muddy. The trees along the trail were bare, black branches scratching at the gray sky. A cold wind came off the water, carrying that damp metallic smell that rivers have in late fall, like coins and rot. On the opposite bank, responders were clustered, their bright jackets like unnatural flowers against the dead landscape. A crane truck was parked near the trail, its arm extended toward the water. The car was barely visible at first, just a dark shape under the surface, distorted by ripples and silt. Then the crane began to pull. Mud and water sloughed off the roof as it emerged. The windshield was spiderwebbed. The headlights were off. The car looked like it had been swallowed and spit out. It was Jordan's car. I recognized the bumper sticker on the back. "I brake for ghosts." He'd put it on as a joke. No one laughed now. The responders moved with practiced precision, hooking straps, stabilizing, checking angles. The car rose slowly, water streaming from the doors like tears. Mrs. Brennan made a sound beside me that wasn't a word. Jordan's dad grabbed the railing so hard his knuckles went white. I stood frozen, watching the river give up what it had taken. They didn't pull the bodies out in front of us. They didn't need to. The way the responders' faces set, the way their movements slowed, told us everything before anyone spoke. An officer approached the families, his expression carefully controlled. He spoke in low tones, too low for me to hear, but I watched Mrs. Brennan's face collapse like a building losing its foundation. Jordan's dad made a choking sound and turned away, vomiting into the grass. My knees went weak. I sat down on the cold concrete of the walkway, my back against the railing. The world narrowed. The wind, the river, the voices around me became muffled, like I was underwater too. It was an accident, they said later. A sharp turn. Poor visibility. Intoxication. No braking. The car had gone off the road and down the embankment into the water. The river did what rivers do. It filled the car. It took their air. It kept them. It was the kind of story people tell themselves to make tragedy feel orderly. They made a mistake, so there's a reason, so the universe isn't random. But when I went back to the dorm that night, the neatness of the explanation didn't fit inside my chest. It rattled around, useless. Kayla's bed was still unmade. Her hoodie was draped over the chair. Jordan's cape was still in the corner where he'd tossed a different costume piece weeks ago. Ordinary objects that suddenly looked obscene. I opened Life 360 again. Their dots were gone. Not because the app had decided to be merciful, but because their phones had died. Battery drained, signal gone. 2 green circles had been replaced by gray offline icons. No location, no update, nothing. The quiet of it made me nauseous. The next days were a blur of statements and vigils and campus counselors with gentle voices. People posted photos of Kayla and Jordan with captions like "Gone too soon" and "Fly high." The dorm hall filled with candles and stuffed animals and cheap printed posters that curled at the corners from humidity. I signed a card for Mrs. Brennan and wrote something meaningless like "I'm so sorry because there are no words that do anything in the face of a river." At the memorial, they played a slideshow with upbeat music that felt wrong. Kayla in sunlight, Kayla in a pumpkin patch, Kayla laughing with a drink in her hand at some party. Jordan smiling with his arm around friends. Jordan in a graduation cap. Jordan holding a cat. Life captured in bright rectangles. I sat in the back row and stared at the screen, thinking about the 2 dots on my phone that had been more honest than any photo. After it was over, I went back to my room and sat at my desk, staring at my laptop without turning it on. The silence was heavy, pressing into my ears. I opened the app again. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me needed to see it, to confirm it hadn't been a nightmare. Maybe because it was the last place I'd seen them alive, even if it was only a dot. The history tab showed their last recorded route. Last location, Cedar River, 4:55 a.m. Last location, Cedar River, 4:55 a.m. Then, under Jordan's entry, something I hadn't noticed before, a small timestamp. Driving detected, 2:31 a.m. My throat tightened. Driving detected. The app had recognized they were moving in a vehicle. It had recorded it. It had noted it in the background like a casual observation. I clicked it. A map opened. A thin line traced a route from the party location, through a few streets near campus, and then toward the river bend. The line ended abruptly at the water, but there was something else. A small icon along the route, like a warning triangle. I tapped it. Possible crash detected. Time, 2:48 a.m. I stared. Possible crash detected. I hadn't seen that the night it happened. I hadn't gotten a notification. Maybe my settings were wrong. Maybe the app couldn't reach me because I was asleep. Maybe it had tried and failed and moved on. Or maybe it had done exactly what it was designed to do. Log it, record it, store it. My skin went cold. The app had known. It had known they crashed at 2:48 a.m. It had detected a sudden stop, a jolt, a violent change in motion. It had written it down quietly, tucked it into a timeline, waiting for someone to look. Kayla and Jordan had been in the river for hours before I woke up. Before I checked. Before I called anyone. Hours. I imagined them in the car, water rising, panic, the cold shock, the way sound changes when you're submerged. I imagined their hands scrabbling at seatbelts, at doors that wouldn't open against pressure. I imagined Kayla's phone still glowing in the dark water, still sending out little pulses of data, still updating its location, like a heartbeat the system could hear even when no one else could. My breath came in shallow, sharp pulls. I shut the phone off and then turned it back on, as if restarting it would erase what I'd seen. The crash icon was still there. Possible crash detected. I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the blank wall above Kayla's bed. The dorm was quiet. Most people were at the vigil, or out drinking, to forget. The building felt like a shell. I thought about how technology is sold to us as protection, as a safety net, as a way to always know. But knowing isn't saving. Sometimes knowing is just watching. Sometimes the app is the only witness. That night, as I finally lay down, my phone on the pillow beside me, like a nervous habit, I realized the part that would haunt me forever wasn't the river. It was the map. It was the clean line ending at the water, and the tiny warning icon sitting there like a polite note. A system had watched 2 people die, logged it, and kept going, waiting calmly for someone to check the next morning. And in my mind, I kept seeing those 2 dots perfectly still in the river, already done, while above them, the campus kept pulsing with music and laughter, as if nothing had happened at all. Story 4, The Board, by Customer Service. The first thing you learn in asset protection is that people think they're invisible, not in the poetic way, in a practical, modern way. They assume the cameras are fake, the associates aren't paying attention, the alarms are random. They assume the building is too big, the employees too tired, and the system's too overwhelmed to notice one person doing one wrong thing. Most days, they're right. Walmart on a weekday afternoon has a particular atmosphere. Fluorescent light that makes everyone look slightly unwell. A constant low hum of refrigeration units, and the soft squeak of carts rolling over tile that never feels fully clean. The air smells like detergent, fried food from the deli, and something faintly metallic from the garden center. I've been in this building long enough that I can tell when a cart has a bad wheel just by the sound it makes. That's not a talent I'm proud of. It's just what happens when your life becomes watching, noticing, cataloging the smallest shifts in behavior like you're reading an endless, boring novel where every chapter is the same but the mistakes change. My job is simple to explain and hard to do well. Prevent loss, prevent shrink, and keep people safe. Theft is the part everyone thinks about. The fights, the scams, the shoplifting. But the safety part is what keeps me awake. Because safety isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a bad feeling you can't justify until it's too late. We have a missing person board by the service desk. Corporate calls it community outreach. A little cork board with printed flyers and age progression photos. It's not mandatory, but our store manager likes to look good on paper, so we keep it updated. I'm the one who does it, because I'm the one who actually reads the flyers. Most customers walk past without seeing it. They're focused on returns, on money orders, on the long line that snakes between stanchions. They stare at their phones and complain about the wait and never lift their eyes to the faces on the board. The faces fade in that place, not physically, but in the way attention fades. A poster can be inches from your shoulder and still be invisible if you don't want to know what it means. That afternoon, the line at customer service was long enough to irritate the entire front end. It was the week after Thanksgiving. People were returning things they'd bought on impulse. Air fryers still in the box, sweaters that didn't fit, toys opened and then lost the receipt. I was in the AP office behind the one-way glass, watching the monitor wall. 32 camera feeds in a grid, all slightly different shades of the same fluorescent misery. My coffee had gone cold. The radio on my shoulder kept chirping with minor issues. A spill in aisle 12. A suspected push-out at grocery. A teenager messing with the bike locks. Then the service desk associate called me. Her name was Tessa. She'd been with us for 6 months. Still sharp, still trying, still not fully numb. "Vincent," she said, voice low, controlled. "You need to come up front." I sat up straighter. "What's going on?" There was a pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. "There's a customer in line," she said. She looks like the missing person on the board." My skin prickled. Not fear exactly. Alertness. "Which one?" I asked. Tessa swallowed, and I heard it through the radio like a small, nervous sound. "The girl," she said. "The one from the county. The one with the freckles." I knew exactly which one. Her name on the flyer was Alyssa Page, 19, missing for 4 months, last seen leaving a gas station on the edge of town with an older couple. The story had been on the local news for about a week, then faded like everything does. People moved on. The board stayed. "I'm coming," I said. I left the AP office and walked the back corridor toward the front end. The corridor smells different than the sales floor. Cardboard, dust, the faint sour bite of old produce in the compactor area. The building's bones, the parts customers never see. By the time I reached the front, the noise hit me. Cartwheels, overhead announcements, kids crying, the constant buzz of human impatience. The service desk line was wrapped around the impulse buy shelves. Candy, phone chargers, cheap earbuds. The missing person board sat on the wall behind the line, half covered by a holiday promo sign advertising gift cards. Tessa was at the counter, scanning a receipt while pretending to be calm. She saw me and flicked her eyes toward the line without moving her head. I followed her gaze. A woman stood about 5 people back. At first glance, she looked ordinary. Plain winter coat, hair pulled back under a beanie, hands tucked into her sleeves like she was cold. Nothing about her screamed danger. Nothing about her screamed victim either. But then I saw her face. It wasn't the face from the flyer, not exactly. The flyer photo was older, pre-missing, bright-eyed, captured in sunlight. This face was paler, thinner. The cheeks looked slightly hollow. The mouth was set in a careful line like she'd trained it not to tremble. Still, there were markers that don't change. The shape of the eyes, the freckles across the nose, a small crescent scar near the left eyebrow. My heart did a slow, heavy drop. It was her, or it was someone who looked enough like her to make my skin go cold. I didn't stare. AP doesn't stare. Staring is how you spook people. Staring is how you make a situation explode. Instead, I turned my head slightly and glanced at the board as if I was checking something. Alyssa Page's flyer was on the left side, pinned crookedly, corners curling. Her photo stared out with that unaware smile people have before the world takes them. I looked back at the woman in line. The resemblance was not uncanny. It was exact. My mouth went dry. I stepped closer to Tessa, leaning in as if I was asking about a return issue. "Keep her here," I murmured. "Don't let her leave. Don't make it obvious." Tessa's eyes flicked toward the woman again. "She's returning something," she whispered. "She keeps looking at the doors." That detail tightened something in my chest. People in line look at the doors when they're impatient. They look at the doors when they want out. They also look at the doors when someone is waiting for them. I lifted my radio. "Front end to AP," I said quietly. "I need an officer dispatched to the store. Possible missing person sighting." Static crackled. Then the assistant manager's voice came through. "Vincent, confirm?" "Confirm," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Do not announce." Discreet response. I didn't call 911 directly. Not yet. I needed to be sure. If I was wrong, if I dragged a random woman into a police scene because she resembled a flyer, it would be a mess. It would be humiliating for her, damaging for us, and it would make people less likely to report things in the future. But if I was right, and she walked out that door, I'd never sleep again. I moved to the side of the service desk, near the phone kiosk, pretending to review a display. In reality, I was watching through the reflection in the glass. The woman in line didn't fidget like most people. She stood too still, shoulders slightly raised, as if trying to make herself smaller. Her eyes didn't wander to the candy or the phone cases. They stayed on Tessa, on the counter, and then flicked to the entrance. Flick, flick, like she was checking a leash. Behind her, an older man and woman stood in line too, but not directly behind her. They were offset, like they were there, but not attached. The man wore a hunting jacket and a ball cap. The woman had short hair and a tight mouth. Their cart held a few items: cleaning supplies, a bag of dog food, and a boxed appliance. A return plus purchases. Normal. Except nothing about their eyes was normal. They were watching the woman. Not in a casual way, not in a way that said family, in a way that said ownership. My pulse thudded. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Plenty of people watch each other in public. Couples argue silently. Parents monitor kids. But the way the older man's gaze kept landing on the back of the woman's neck made me feel like I was looking at a hand around someone's throat. The line moved. The woman stepped forward. Tessa finished with her current customer and called next. The woman approached the counter. She set a small box down, an electric toothbrush, unopened, still sealed. She held out a receipt with fingers that shook just enough to be noticeable if you were looking. I was looking. Tessa scanned it. "You want it back on the original card?" she asked. The standard script. The woman hesitated. A beat too long. Her eyes flicked toward the older couple. The older woman's mouth tightened. The older man gave a tiny nod. The woman swallowed. "Gift card," she said quietly. My stomach sank. Gift cards are currency. Gift cards are untraceable. Tessa kept her face neutral, but her hands moved slightly slower as she processed the return. She was buying time. Good. As she tapped through screens, she said in the same customer service tone she'd use with anyone, "Can I see your ID?" The woman's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. The older man stepped forward. "Why?" he snapped, too loud. Tessa smiled. "It's just for the return," she said smoothly. "Policy for this amount." The amount wasn't high. It didn't need ID. But it was an excuse. The woman fumbled in her coat pocket, fingers clumsy like she'd forgotten how to perform normal gestures. She pulled out a wallet and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was an ID. I saw the name. It wasn't Alyssa Page. It was something else. A different first name, a different last name. But names are the easiest thing to change. Faces are harder. Tessa glanced at it, and then, in one fluid motion, slid it back. She didn't linger on the name. She didn't react. Instead, she said, "1 second, our system's being slow," and turned slightly, pressing a button under the counter. A silent alarm for AP. My radio crackled. "Officer en route," the assistant manager said. I exhaled slowly through my nose, keeping my expression blank even as my thoughts slammed into each other. If this was Alyssa, she was using a fake ID. She was doing a return for a gift card. She was being watched by an older couple. My mind filled in the rest without permission. Kidnapping, coercion, threats, a controlled life disguised as normal errands. It's not the kind of thing you want to believe you're seeing in your store on a Thursday. But the longer you work this job, the more you understand that Walmart is not just a store, it's a cross-section. Every kind of life walks through those sliding doors. Every kind of problem follows. Tessa handed the woman the gift card and the receipt. "All set," she said. The woman's fingers closed around the card, and for the briefest moment I saw something in her eyes that made me feel sick. Not relief, fear, not of getting caught. Fear of what would happen after she walked out. She turned away from the counter. Her gaze flicked to the entrance again. The older couple moved with her, not touching her, but orbiting, blocking angles, keeping her within the invisible boundary they'd built around her. The older man's hand rested on the cart handle like it was a weapon. The woman didn't run. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked. That's the thing people don't understand about missing persons. We imagine they're screaming in basements, fighting constantly, trying to escape every second. But control doesn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like compliance. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing in line at customer service returning an electric toothbrush because she's been instructed to. They headed toward the doors. My heartbeat was loud enough I thought it might show on my face. I stepped forward, positioning myself near the entrance without making it obvious. I pretended to straighten a stack of carts, one hand on the metal handle, eyes tracking reflections in the glass. The doors whooshed open. Cold air rushed in. Outside, I saw a police cruiser glide into the parking lot, lights off, moving fast but not frantic. Good. The older couple didn't notice at first. The woman did. Her eyes landed on the cruiser, and something in her posture changed. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like the weight of holding herself together had shifted. The older man noticed her noticing. He snapped his head toward the parking lot. His expression hardened. He leaned close to the woman, mouth moving, saying something I couldn't hear. Her face drained of color. She took another step toward the door. The older woman angled her cart, subtly blocking the path. In that moment, the woman's eyes met mine, just for a second. And in that second, everything in her face screamed without sound. Please. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The cruiser stopped a few spaces away. 2 officers stepped out, moving quickly but casually. Their body language was controlled, practiced. They approached the doors. As they did, the older man's hand went to his pocket. I moved without thinking. I stepped into their path and raised my hand as if I was gesturing for a cart. "Hey," I said loudly friendly. "Sir, you can't take that cart outside past the bollards." It was nonsense. We allow carts outside all the time. But it made him stop. His eyes snapped to mine, irritated, suspicious. It also bought a second. The officers entered. One of them glanced at me. I gave a small nod, barely perceptible, and flicked my gaze toward the woman. The officer's eyes followed. He looked at her face. Then he looked at the board behind the service desk. Then he looked back at her. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, calm. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" The woman froze. The older man immediately bristled. "What's this about?" he demanded. "We didn't do anything." The officer held up a hand. "Just a quick conversation," he said. "Ma'am, what's your name?" The woman's lips parted. No sound came out. The older woman leaned in, voice sharp. "Her name is Rachel," she snapped. "We're leaving." The second officer stepped closer, positioning himself between the older couple and the doors in a way that looked natural to anyone who wasn't trained to see it. The first officer looked directly at the woman. "Ma'am," he said, voice lower now. "Are you Alyssa Page?" The woman's eyes filled instantly. Tears pooled and spilled over, silent. She didn't nod. She didn't speak, but her face answered. The older man lunged forward, hand coming out of his pocket with something dark and small. I didn't wait to see what it was. I grabbed his wrist and twisted. Hard. The object clattered to the tile. A folding knife. Cheap. Blunt from use. The officer moved in immediately, slamming the man against a cart corral and yanking his arms behind his back. The older woman screamed, a high, ugly sound that turned heads across the vestibule. Customers stared. Phones lifted. People love a spectacle, even when it's someone's life cracking open. The woman, Alyssa, backed away, trembling so hard her knees buckled. Tessa came around the counter without thinking and caught her by the elbow, steadying her. Alyssa clung to her like a drowning person clings to driftwood. The officers cuffed the older couple. The man cursed, spitting accusations. The woman sobbed and insisted it was a misunderstanding, that Alyssa was family, that she'd chosen to stay with them. Alyssa made a small sound then, barely audible. "No," she whispered. It was the first word I'd heard her say. The word landed like a stone. The officers led the couple away. Alyssa stayed near the service desk, shaking, eyes darting around as if expecting punishment for speaking. I stood a few feet away, trying to look neutral, professional, but my stomach was turning. I'd dealt with violence. I dealt with theft rings. I dealt with desperate people doing desperate things. But watching a missing person stand in front of her own flyer, alive, was something else entirely. It felt like the world glitching, like the board had briefly become a door. An officer approached me later, after Alyssa had been taken to a private room and a victim advocate arrived. "Good call," he said quietly. I nodded, but my throat was too tight to answer. He glanced toward the service desk where the board hung. "How'd you spot her?" "Tessa did," I said. "She recognized her from the flyer." The officer shook his head slowly. "Most people don't look at those." "I know," I said. That night, after everything was done and the store finally emptied, I went back to the front end. The lights were dimmed, the registers silent. The service desk looked abandoned, like a stage after the actors had left. I stood in front of the missing person board. Alyssa's flyer was still pinned there. Same smile, same sunlight. But now I'd seen the version of her who existed after the photo, the version with hollow cheeks and fear in her eyes, the version who stood in line returning stolen merchandise, like it was the only way to keep breathing. I reached up and touched the edge of the paper. It was damp from the air, curling more at the corners. I thought about how close she'd come to walking out, how easily my attention could have been pulled elsewhere. A spill, a push-out, 1,000 petty thefts. How easily she could have dissolved back into the parking lot and into a life where compliance was survival. People don't disappear because no one sees them. They disappear because no one looks long enough. I took the flyer down that night, not because she didn't matter anymore, but because it felt wrong to leave her face up like a warning after she'd been found. The board looked emptier without it, like a tooth pulled. As I carried the flyer back toward the office, I realized something that settled cold in my bones. Our store has cameras everywhere. We record thousands of hours of footage every week. Faces enter and exit. People steal, people fight, people cry, people buy birthday cakes and diapers and cheap wine. We see everything. And yet, Alyssa had walked through these doors with her captors and stood in line under a missing person board. And if Tessa hadn't lifted her eyes at the right moment, she would have left again. The thought stayed with me as I locked the AP office and turned off the monitor wall. All those screens went black at once, reflecting my face back at me in a grid. For a second, in the dark glass, I couldn't tell if I was watching or being watched. And I understood, with a sinking certainty, that in a building this bright, a person can still vanish if the right eyes don't catch them in time. Story 5. Emergency Contact. The call came at 6:12 a.m., which is the kind of time only two types of people use your phone number. Someone who loves you enough to forget the hour, or someone who doesn't care about your day at all. I was on my second alarm, half awake, 1 foot already out of bed, and my brain still floating somewhere behind my eyes. The room was dim, winter light leaking through the blinds in pale stripes. My apartment smelled faintly of cold coffee and laundry detergent. The radiator clanked once, and then went quiet again. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. I almost let it ring. I had work in 2 hours. I had a life built on ignoring things that weren't scheduled. Then it rang again immediately, like whoever it was had decided it wasn't optional. I answered. "Hello?" A man's voice, calm and professional. "Good morning." "Is this Daniel Hart?" My throat tightened. Hearing your full name before you're fully awake has a way of making you feel like you've done something wrong. "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" "This is Officer Reeves with the City Police Department," he said. No rush, no dramatic tone. Just the voice of someone who has delivered bad news enough times that it has become a kind of routine. I sat up straighter, my skin prickled. "Okay," I said cautiously. "I'm calling because your name and number were listed as the emergency contact on a missing person report," he said. "We need to speak with you." For a second, my brain tried to fit that sentence into my life like a puzzle piece that obviously belonged to someone else's box. Emergency contact, missing person, my name. "I think you have the wrong number," I said, a laugh creeping into my voice because denial is sometimes the first defense your body reaches for. "I don't believe so," Officer Reeves replied. "This number is saved under ICE in the missing individual's phone in case of emergency." ICE. I'd used that abbreviation myself years ago when everyone was telling you to add it to your phone contacts. It was supposed to be practical, a small, smart thing you did to be safe. My mouth went dry. "What is the person's name?" I asked. There was the faint sound of paper shifting. The missing person's name is Mara Ellison, he said. The name hit me like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I didn't recognize it. Not immediately. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. It wasn't a coworker. I didn't have a Mara in my phone. I didn't have a Mara in my calendar. I didn't have a Mara in my life. I don't know anyone by that name, I said. Officer Reeves didn't argue. He just let a beat of silence stretch, like he was watching to see if my memory would catch up. Sir, he said finally, we located a phone that belongs to her. It's damaged, but still accessible. Your contact information is stored as her emergency contact. It's the only number listed. My heart began to thud, hard and hollow. Located a phone? I repeated. So you found her? Another pause, smaller this time. We recovered a deceased individual overnight, he said carefully. We cannot confirm identity until the medical examiner completes the process, but we have reason to believe she is the missing person associated with this phone. The room tilted slightly. It wasn't dizziness. It was my body stepping away from reality, because reality had suddenly become too sharp. Deceased, missing, emergency contact. My name. I don't understand, I whispered. That's why we're calling, he said. Can you confirm whether you know Amara Ellison, or if you've had contact with her in the last year? No, I said. Then, weaker. I don't think so. Officer Reeves didn't sound impatient. That somehow made it worse. We'd like you to come down to the station, he said. We have some questions, and we may need assistance identifying belongings. Belongings. That word is like a door closing. It means there's no miracle coming. I stared at the stripes of light on my wall. My hands felt numb around the phone. Somewhere outside, a car passed on wet pavement, tires making a hush sound like someone dragging a hand over fabric. Okay, I said, and it came out hoarse. Okay, I'll come. He gave me the address and a case number. He told me to bring identification. He thanked me for my cooperation in a tone that suggested cooperation was something you could choose. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. When I finally lowered it, my screen was still lit. My contact list opened from where my finger had drifted automatically, searching for the name. Mara Ellison. Not there. I typed it into my notes app as if writing it down could make it make sense. Mara Ellison. The name looked wrong in my font, too clean for what it was attached to. I got dressed without thinking. Jeans, hoodie, coat. My hands moved through the motions like I was watching someone else prepare for the day. I brushed my teeth and tasted nothing. I poured coffee and forgot to drink it. In the elevator down to the lobby, my reflection looked pale and slightly older than it should. My eyes had that wide, stunned look people get in the aftermath of almost accidents, like your body is still bracing for impact. Outside, the city was gray and wet. Last night's rain clung to everything. Sidewalks shining, trees dripping, the air smelling like damp concrete. The sky hung low and colorless, making the whole world look like it had been bleached. I drove to the station in silence. No music, no podcast, just the faint sound of my wipers and my own breathing. At every red light, I checked my phone again, scrolling through contacts, through old emails, through my social media messages, looking for anything that could explain why a dead stranger had my number listed as ICE. I found nothing. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that I didn't recognize her name, it was that my life had no slot where she could fit. The station smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. The lobby was quiet at that hour, a few people sitting in plastic chairs under a flickering television that played the morning news with the volume low. A front desk officer took my ID and made a call. After a few minutes, Officer Reeves came out to meet me. He was younger than I expected, early 30s, tired eyes, coffee breath. He didn't look dramatic. He looked like someone who'd been up all night doing things he couldn't talk about. "Mr. Hart," he said, offering his hand. I shook it automatically. He led me through a hallway into a small interview room. The overhead light was too bright. The chair was bolted to the floor. He sat across from me and slid a file folder onto the table. "Before we start," he said, "I want to be clear about what we know and what we don't." I nodded, feeling like I was nodding in a dream. "We recovered an unidentified female," he said, "found near the Eastern Service Road off Route 11. The scene suggests exposure and prolonged time outdoors." He hesitated, then continued. "We recovered a phone from a drainage ditch nearby. The device is damaged, but we were able to access emergency contact information." He opened the folder and turned a photo toward me. It was the phone. or what was left of it. The screen was spiderwebbed, cracked so completely it looked like ice on a pond. The casing was scuffed and dirty. There were dried brown streaks along one edge that made my stomach turn. I looked away. "We're hoping you can help us establish who she is," Reeves said, "or at least confirm whether you've had any connection." "I don't know her," I said again, more firmly, like repeating it could build a wall. Reeves nodded. "Okay, let's take it from the top. Do you recognize the name Mara Ellison?" "No." "Have you ever dated anyone named Mara?" "No." "Do you work with anyone named Mara?" "No." Reeves scribbled notes. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. "Do you have any reason someone would list you as an emergency contact?" he asked. I stared at him. "No," I said. That's what I'm trying to understand." He held my gaze for a moment, then reached into the folder and slid another sheet toward me. It was a screenshot, a contact entry from the phone pulled from the emergency information screen. Daniel Hart. My number. A small icon next to it indicating primary emergency contact. Below that, a second screenshot, a text thread. My breath caught. The messages were old, dated, the timestamps small in the corner. The thread name was my number, unsaved, like the phone hadn't stored me as a contact beyond ice, but had still messaged me. Reeves watched my face carefully. "Do you recognize these texts?" he asked. I leaned forward, eyes scanning. The first message was from the missing person's phone. "Hey, it's me. I don't know if you still have this number." The second, sent 3 hours later. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be doing this. Just needed to hear something familiar." Then another, the next day. "Please don't ignore this. I don't have anyone else." My stomach dropped through the floor. Because I did recognize them. Not the words, the memory of seeing them. That tiny flash of familiarity you get when something you buried rises up unexpectedly, still damp from the dark. I remembered glancing at my phone at work, seeing an unknown number, reading something like "it's me," and feeling irritation spike because it looked like a scam or a wrong number or drama I didn't have time for. I remembered swiping it away. I remembered thinking, not today. Reeves's voice was softer now. "Mr. Hart?" I might have gotten texts," I said, and my voice sounded sick. "From an unknown number, a while ago." I didn't respond. Reeves nodded slowly. "We pulled more," he said, and slid another screenshot forward. More messages. "I'm in the city. I saw you on 8th Street. You looked right through me. I don't think you remember. That's the worst part. It's okay. I get it. I'm different now." My hands started to shake. I pressed them flat on the table to stop it. "I don't understand," I whispered again, but this time it wasn't denial. It was fear. Why would she say she saw me? I don't know her. Reeves took a breath. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people in crisis latch onto familiar names. Maybe she found your information somewhere. Maybe there's a mistake. Maybe." He stopped, because the look on my face had changed. In the back of my mind, a door had opened. Not fully. Just a crack. Enough for something cold to leak through. A memory. A different time. A woman in a doorway, years ago, holding a cardboard box. A voice saying, "Just keep me as your emergency contact, okay? Just in case." And me, laughing, dismissive, saying, "Sure, fine." I stared at the table until the laminate pattern blurred. "Can I see her?" I asked suddenly. Reeves hesitated. "The remains are with the medical examiner," he said. "We can't." "No," I said, sharper. "Not the body. The phone. The account. The profile. Something. A photo." Reeves watched me for a long moment, then nodded and stood. He left the room, returning a minute later with the tablet. He opened a file and turned it toward me. A driver's license photo. A young woman with dark hair pulled back, tired eyes, a faint frown as if she'd been asked to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Freckles across her cheeks. A small crescent scar near her left eyebrow. The room went silent. My breath stopped. I knew that scar. I traced it once with my thumb in a cheap apartment kitchen while pasta boiled over on the stove and we laughed like nothing could ever end. My vision blurred. The tablet shook in Reeves's hands because I was shaking too. "That's..." I started, and my voice broke. Reeves's eyes sharpened. "You recognize her?" I swallowed hard. "Her name wasn't Mara," I whispered. It was Allie. Allie, short for Alyssa. Alyssa Page. The missing person from the board, by customer service. The girl who had been found months earlier, rescued, returned. Except this was impossible, because Alyssa had been found. I had watched that video on the news. I had seen the headline. I had felt that brief, warm relief, that satisfying closure you get when a story ends neatly. But the woman in the photo was Allie. Older, thinner, changed, and the scar was the same. Reeves's voice was very quiet. "Mr. Hart," he said, "are you saying the missing person's name is Alyssa Page?" I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Reeves's jaw tensed. "Alyssa Page was recovered alive," he said almost to himself. "3 months ago, we have a record." She gave a statement. "The suspects are in custody." My hands clenched. "Then who is this?" I whispered. Reeves looked down at the tablet, then back up at me, and something in his eyes shifted from procedure to unease. "Maybe it's someone else with a similar scar," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I leaned back in the chair, dizzy. The room felt too bright. The air felt thin. Pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. Allie and I had dated years ago. Not seriously, not long, but intensely in that way your early 20s can be. Late night drives, cheap takeout, promises you mean in the moment. She'd been the kind of person who noticed small things. The way street lights flicker, the way certain places feel wrong. She'd talk about patterns like they were alive. I'd liked her, but I'd also been impatient with her. She took things too seriously. She asked questions that didn't have clean answers. She wanted reassurance I didn't know how to give. We'd ended badly. Not with screaming, but with drifting. Unanswered texts, missed calls, the slow withdrawal of attention until the relationship died without a clear moment you could point to. I hadn't thought about her in years, because thinking about her meant thinking about the part of myself that disappears when I stop caring. Reeves spoke again, pulling me back. "We need to verify identity," he said. "But if this is Alyssa Page, then something is very wrong." I stared at the tablet again, at Allie's face. Her eyes looked older than they should, like she'd lived in fear too long, like she'd been found and still not safe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me violently. I fumbled it out. A notification. Life 360. I didn't even remember I still had the app. I'd installed it years ago for a brief period when my nephew went off to camp and my sister insisted the whole family should be connected. I'd never used it. I'd forgotten it existed. The notification was from Life 360. Emergency alert. Possible crash detected. My blood ran cold. Reeves leaned forward. "What is that?" I stared at the screen, heart hammering. The alert had a location pin attached. It wasn't my location. It was hers. A dot on the map, pulsing. Not on Route 11, not on the Eastern Service Road, somewhere else entirely. And beneath it, a name I hadn't seen in years, suddenly active again on my screen. Alyssa Page. The dot moved slightly, then stopped, then moved again. Just a small drift, as if someone had picked up the phone, as if whatever had ended her had not finished cleaning up the loose ends. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Reeves grabbed his radio. "Dispatch. I need units to this location," he said, voice tight. "Now." I stared at the pulsing dot, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. And in that sterile interview room, with fluorescent light bleaching everything into clarity, I realized the worst part. She had listed me as her emergency contact because she knew I would see the dot. She knew the system would call someone. She knew, even after everything, that if the world was going to notice her at all, it would be through a screen in someone else's hand. The dot pulsed again. Then slowly, it began to move. Not like a car, not like a person walking, but like something being carried away with steady intent, leaving the place where she had died as if the story was not finished with her yet. You have reached the end of these records, the point where timelines stop updating, where the screen finally goes dark, and where the system assumes there is nothing more to report. The cases you heard tonight do not end cleanly. They rarely do. Some are closed on paper. Some are resolved with names, locations, and causes. And some remain suspended, not because no one cares, but because no one knows what question to ask next. If any of these stories stayed with you, if you felt something shift when a location pin refused to move, when a database returned a name too late to matter, when a face was recognized only because someone happened to look up, or when a phone continued reporting long after its owner could not, do not dismiss that feeling. Disappearances do not happen all at once. They happen in stages. A missed check-in, an unanswered message, a routine that quietly breaks while everything around it continues functioning as expected. In the real world, missing persons are not rare events, and they are not always dramatic. They are often ordinary people, last seen doing ordinary things, whose absence is explained away until the explanation no longer holds. If you ever believe someone is missing, do not wait for certainty. Contact local law enforcement immediately. There is no required waiting period. If you have information about an unresolved case, or believe you recognize someone from a missing person report, you can also submit tips through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NamUs, a publicly accessible database used nationwide to connect cases that were never meant to overlap. These systems only function when someone chooses to engage with them. A location history is only useful if someone checks it. A flyer only matters if someone actually looks at it. A record only closes when someone confirms what it represents. And sometimes, the difference between a closed case and a permanent unknown is a single moment of attention. If you want to continue exploring cases like these, stories rooted in real systems, real failures, and real aftermaths, consider subscribing to Entity Shadows. Here, the horror does not come from the impossible, but from what is documented, time-stamped, and quietly ignored. If these stories unsettled you, if they felt familiar in a way you couldn't explain, or if one detail lingered longer than the rest, you are not alone. That discomfort is not fear, it is awareness. And awareness is often the last thing a missing person has left in the world they disappeared from. If you feel compelled to share this video, do so not because it frightened you, but because it reminded you how easily someone can vanish while everything else continues working perfectly. And if you carry a story of your own, a disappearance that never made sense, a moment when a system showed you something it shouldn't have, or a detail you have never fully been able to place, you are welcome to share it. Instructions for submissions are available in the channel bio, and your experience may help illuminate a pattern someone else is still trying to understand. Thank you for listening, for paying attention, for staying present long enough to notice when something quietly stopped belonging. And as you return to your own routines tonight, check in, look twice, trust the instinct that tells you when something should not still be updating. Because the most unsettling part of a missing person case is not the mystery itself, but the moment you realize someone noticed too late. And remember, the dark awaits.